private sector entrepreneurs not relent and must continue to engage with government and also push and establish contacts amongst ourselves so that we need to play more role in the area of advocacy and policy shaping to make sure we have the right environment to do business. Because at times, government itself does not even know what is good for it. And so, my parting shots as I conclude so that we can make it even more interactive. 2. One is, I commend what the dean and the faculty of the school are doing here. I like to see education is key for Africa, the whole world, but Africa in particular because we're like it. I like to see us have more business schools. All of us should play a role in seeing this happen. And the business schools should help us. Because we're talking of how to create Pan-African businesses. Business schools should help us, African entrepreneurs, African students, African aspiring entrepreneurs, and people who do business in Africa. Let's have more case studies. More case studies. Let's have more case studies of successful African businesses that can be role models for others to emulate. Learning points, obstacles, how they did it, what they can, so that not just Western type case studies. The second and the last is, I call on all successful African entrepreneurs, to embrace what I call Afri-capitalism. And what's Afri-capitalism? A kind of thinking now that you can make profit while you do good. Let us begin as African entrepreneurs or business leaders who are endowed, and I know at my table there are some who are extremely endowed, and I believe they are doing very well in their own ways too. But indeed, I think that the age of charity gives grants for Africa to a large extent is over. I think we can channel our resources more productively. I think we can create economic prosperity and social wealth together. I know Michael Porter calls this shared value. I call it Afri-capitalism. Why do I call it Afri-capitalism? In Africa, there's capitalism, but inherently in us, as Africans, we are communal. We support each other. We support one another. And so let's take that philosophy beyond the social realm let's use it to develop Africa. So we want to give something to some. Let's begin to create fishermen in Africa. We've seen the age of donor funds, etc., for decades now. So it's time to ask ourselves, how far have we gone with this? And is that truly what will help develop Africa? I think that the future of Africa lies, as I said before, in our hands, to a large extent in the private sector, and to a large extent in our ability, and that's why I agree with this group totally, to create entrepreneurs, business leaders. Create that spirit of, let's make investments that will help achieve economic prosperity whilst creating social value. I'd like to end here and take some comments from you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Elumelu, for that very inspiring talk and for telling us that Africa can only be saved by the private sector. We are going to take only 3 questions. I have 2 gentlemen who have microphones, so if I see your hand, I'm going to choose the questions.
My simple question is, we need to play an international role in bringing foreign direct investment in Africa. But the foreign direct investment in Africa that we have seen sometimes is skewed towards the scientific experience and growth in the West. How can we negotiate our case in Africa better? And how can we integrate with Europe? How can we integrate with China? How can we integrate with India? How can we integrate with the Americans and South America, which seems far off from Africa? Thank you very much.
My name is Jane Paparas. I'm the CEO of Document, an experiential agency. I'm very Pan-African, but I just wanted to ask, how did you deal with corruption when you are setting up maybe UBA? Perhaps maybe you are bigger and so on. Perhaps have an idea, small agency, and I'm going to this country. And you want to set up the business, and you're meeting a lot of desk and corruption. Even some from the lawyers themselves from that country. Maybe you give money and they take off and they don't give you the deductions. How did you deal with corruption? Thank you.
My question is with regard to how did you manage the growth? Sometimes as the company grows beyond the country and beyond the borders, how do you manage that aspect of having a multinational company, what kind of structures have you put in place to ensure that it functions consistently? And maybe if I can squeeze in another question.
Sure.
We see a lot of West African companies coming into East Africa. We are probably not seeing as many East African companies going to West Africa. You probably tell us why that is.
My question is about talent. So there's a lot of leadership fora that exists within Africa. Several of them have happened recently in Kenya. There's also several initiatives that are happening at the education level. How did you develop the mid-level management to allow you to actually scale up and move into the other countries in Africa? Because I think that's a critical missing piece for us here.
The question on direct foreign investment into Africa, what do we need to do to attract this? And I think the double barrel, the second part of it is how do we get Africa to engage with the rest of the world? Let me start with that. I think for Africa to engage with the rest of the world, in my viewpoint, there are a few things we need to do. I think, take for instance, you hear China deals with Africa through different countries. So there's no Africa strategy for engaging with China. Imagine if we had a well-articulated Africa-wide strategy for Africa dealing with China. And so China wants to deal in Africa. There is blueprint. 1, 2, 3. This is how we're going to engage on mineral exploitation, land acquisition, this and that. It will change a lot of things. And things will be more transparent, more common, and it will actually, that engagement will help development better. I think that's the question he asks, and very fundamental point. In my viewpoint, again, it's another call on the private sector in our continent. We need to begin to engage. The African private sector needs to engage, then we'll carry government along. Ideally, you'd expect the AU to provide a strategy for Africa's engagement with the rest of the world. Blocks. But where that is not happening, the private sector must lead. We should commence convening. We should begin to talk to each other. We should begin to have leaders across geographies in Africa driven by the same objective purpose, sitting together, discussing, looking at issues that are priority to us as related to economic development and advancement, and begin to push this across. So I think that's, to me, the answer to that. That's how we approach it. The first one, therefore, the foreign direct investment, is simple. Money, as they taught us in economics, is fungible. And money does not discriminate. It goes to where it's welcome. African leaders must open the economies for competition. we must simply, beyond all these road shows, trade fairs, etc., to me it's a waste of money. Wrong approach. If you embark on all the road shows on earth, and someone wants to set up a factory in your country, looks at the World Bank competitiveness report, of doing business, ease of doing business report, or even talks to people. How long does it take to clear goods at the wharf? Maybe 1 month. Singapore, how long does it take to clear goods? 2 hours. Where will you take your money to? So to me it's simple. We need to confront the issue of competitiveness across Africa. It is when we begin to deal with it that true economic development again will occur. Anyway, because here we're dealing with rational people who take their money to where they think their money is safe. Okay, second point, corruption. When I spoke, I used a word, I said institutional rigidities. That's part of institutional rigidity. And indeed, we have seen progress in acquiring banking licenses across Africa. We have seen from a time if you wanted to delay the process, I said, okay, no problem, let it be there. One day we'll get the license. But increasingly, and I must give this to African leaders, political leaders, I think we're beginning to understand that people coming into your country to do business is good for the country. And so they are beginning to drive change, but we still have some other rigidities, taxation issues, a lot that we must deliberately push. And again, that's another case for like a broad-based convening for Africans to sit together and say, so that we can engage with our unions, all this AU and co. What is it? Let's engage and say, we need this. Governments should help us do that across board so that business can do well. One of the legitimate aspirations of every government to create employment for their people. Governments don't create employment. Government can only catalyze the economy through the kind of competitive environment they said that will enable private sector to do well and create employment. So the day government begin to understand that there's a nexus between what's important to government and what the private sector is looking for, then I think we begin to get it right. There's still a few small disconnect. We need to make government understand that the intent is the same. We make money, but private sector makes money, they create employment, they pay tax, they help government also to create more revenue. Anyway, so my point is, it did to a lot in our industry exist, but there's been tremendous improvement. So people at times just say, let's wait, or you go talk to the political leadership and say, we want to come to your country. This is not happening. Then I'm sure they will call the people in charge and say, give them this license or whatever authorization they need. The third point, how do you manage, or how did we manage growth, and what kind of a framework did we put in place to manage growth? Very important, because one of the challenges of growing a business is how do you manage growth when it occurs? We all aspire to, so how do you manage growth? We put certain institutional frameworks in place. For instance, at UBA became too large at some point. So we created UBA Africa, UBA 95. Right now, UBA is going through a holdco. UBA is transiting from one institution, one bank, to a financial holding company that will now have UBA Africa, UBA Nigeria, and UBA Capital Holdings. UBA Africa doing its own thing, Nigeria doing its own, all competing under a holding group. And that's administratively, but there are a lot of other things we did to make sure that we're able to, we anticipated growth, because remember, we rolled out rapidly in Nigeria, so we know how it is, what it takes to roll out. Anticipated, put certain institutional frameworks, etc. in place, which also deals with the issue of talent management. Talent management, what we did, we set up what is called UBA Academy. So UBA Academy is like UBA University for training our own people. So all year round training. In fact, Michael Porter just left Nigeria just some days ago, where he took a competitive strategy course, broadcast across the UBA network. 20 countries, all linked up online every time using the video conferencing facility, assembles and just push the message across. So yes, we use UB Academy extensively to develop people. We also acquired people who existing skills, but they were retrained, cultural issues, etc., bringing people together. But that doesn't mean we achieve 100%. We still had challenges here and there, but we kept improving as time went by. Then the last one, regional blocks. Okay, regional blocks. What was the question again? Regional. Okay, the role of regional blocks in economic development and in helping our unions, in helping companies grow. That's the question, right? Okay, I think most unions, I believe, were set up for three objectives. Okay, one is free movement of money, 2 is free movement of people, 3 is free movement of goods and services. And so what we're talking about here, to a large extent, should ideally be driven by our unions. But are unions actually effective? Do members of the unions want to give up the sovereignty on certain issues? How far are we, how far do countries in these unions want to even go? So, but I think that the private sector can push. We can push this, take for instance what I said before about UBA Kenya. For the Kenyan government to be responsive, and I commend the government of Kenya, based on UBA's representation to the government. We are members of African Union. If someone doesn't have a visa, she need to grant visa at the airport to enter, etc. Through that action alone, we have helped to advance one of the objectives of regional unions, free movement of people. So my point there is, ideally, these unions should help to create the kind of markets, the kind of incentives, the kind of framework, enabling framework, etc., that will make all these things happen. But from my experience, especially where I come from, the West African region, there's room for significant improvement. I don't know if it's different here. And so somebody asked a question, if you were going to, so you now ask therefore, if you were going to advise the Kenyan private sector or Kenyan entrepreneur who wants to become multinational within Africa, what would you say? 2 pieces of advice. One is governance. People have argued a lot of people when they say capital. I say capital is secondary. If you have the right governance framework and mechanism in place, you even attract capital into your company. So I think governance, which seems very little, intangible, but yet very, very important. So I would say, let's rethink the way we do our businesses and make sure we institutionalize, we put the right governance framework in place, and that will help us achieve. The second thing is competitiveness. If we have association of manufacturers and different associations in this country, all of us in our respective countries and ultimately across the continent should begin to engage with our government. They must see through their policies and see how their policies affect our ability to compete with our peers in the continent and outside the continent. Thank you.
I will ask Patricia Murugami, the Director of Executive Education at Strathmore Business School, to come and give the closing remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In the true Kenyan spirit, I want to welcome Dr. Edward Mungai, our Dean, together with Dr. Jenga, our founding Dean, to come so that we can give 2 gifts to our 2 key guests. Let's give a true Kenyan clap to Ngugi Kiuna.
It's the black box.
As we welcome Tony Elumelu, I ask you to do a standing ovation. Welcome, Tony Elumelu. My humble duty this morning, 297 of you confirmed, 360 showed up. Thank you. First and foremost, Tony Elumelu, African business leader, for an engaging, insightful, sincere story of UBA, United Bank for Africa. Have you seen the connection between the name and the spirit? So when you're naming your companies, think about what you want to achieve, because chances are it'll be fueled by how you name it and the governance and the board, as well as the talent that's driving that business. Thank you very much. Dr. Wiebe Buer, CEO, Tony Elumelu Foundation, thank you very much. Ngugi Kuna, Asante Sana, the host chairman, UBA Kenya, and an effective director, program alumni. Thank you. Dr. ETS Adriko, chairman of UBA Uganda. Thank you. Joined by Dr. Ben Mbonye of the Uganda board. Thank you. Tunashukuru General Robert Mboma, retired chairman, as you can guess from the language, UBA Tanzania. Thank you. CEO Africa, Edgar Gabriel. Thank you very much. Emeke Iweriobor, Deputy MD, UBA Africa. Thank you. Muyiwa Akinyemi, MD Kenya. Thank you. And the board of directors from Zambia, Mozambique, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya, a truly Pan-African board. Thank you. In fact, as I was listening to you speaking, I thought about what Martin Luther said, that life's most persistent question is, what are we doing for others? So the board, together with your talent in the respective companies, thank you for beginning to answer that question. Our